والصلوات والسلام على رسول الله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How about we go back to the gold standard? If that's what you're asking, then you either don't know about history or you know it and you just don't care about it. Now, it's not about why you should or should not own gold. It's simply a video explaining why we as a global community cannot simply replace the dollar with gold. Basically, you'll go back in time because that's what we were in. We were in the gold standard and then we moved to the fiat standard. So we can't go back. There's a reason why we left it and where we are today. So gold is basically dead for the sake of long-term investment. It's not the worst, but it's not something that you would be beating inflation with. If you were to look past 30 years, gold returns somewhat of 500%. Now you might think, wow, 500%. Yeah, in the last 30 years. So this is not including the inflation, which before 2020 was around 2 to 3%. Now it should be around 9 to 10%. When you sell that gold, you have to pay a fee, which is 1 to 3% of that current gold price that you're selling it at. And then when you sell it, there's capital gains tax on it, which depending on your income can range between 12 to 50%. If you look at the gold chart around 30 years ago, it was around $400, and as you can see, it's hovering around 2K. So it's about a 5x from there. And then look over here, what's the silver? Gold gives you a rough idea of how much it performed within the last couple of years, all the way to 20 years. Now, during this time, if you were to look at any normal stock, normal company that you're familiar with, for example, Home Depot, everybody has an idea of Home Depot, hardware store. Around the same time, if you put your money in Home Depot, you would be up 768%. You would have 7 extra money. Costco, for example, very well known, you've been up 1,170%. ISRG, Intuitive Surgical, it's the only halal stock in terms of their finance because it's the only stock that has no debt. You can check their financials online on Seeking Alpha or whatever website you want, but you can check. Regardless, if you were to invest in them within the same time span of gold's growth, you'd be up around 3,000%. Point is that although it sounds nice that for the past 30 years gold went up 500%, had you picked any other regular stock that you're familiar with today, any company, so as I mentioned to you, that or even any of the tech stocks like Apple, Facebook, but you might be thinking, well, I don't know if those are haram, but as I showed you, there was Intuitive Surgical, which is a zero debt stock. So had you had put your money anywhere else, basically, around the same time, you'd be up way more than gold. And on top of that, how would you think you'd be handling this gold for the past 30 years? I'm guessing it wouldn't be not much because that's already a headache if you're dealing with $100,000 of gold. Would you leave it at the bank vault? It's kind of contradictory. If you're a gold bug, you already wouldn't be trusting the bank, or else you'd be in fiat money. Yeah, so it's like, what is wrong with you? Why would you leave it at the bank? You would know that they can just take it. Is it in a safe in your house with a special number code? Well, now you have a headache, and we're just talking about small to medium amounts. And you having that safe in your house is basically a honeypot for anybody to attack your house, put a gun to your head, and basically your gold is gone. But let's not stop at the late to 20th century. We can go back further to the 14th century. There's a period known as the Great Debasement, and this basically is a monetary policy of Henry, the one with the 6 wives, that is Henry VIII, and his son Edward, when he became king, took over. And this policy damaged the economy. And who suffered? Well, the people, the general people. They suffered through living through such an expensive environment at that time. When King Henry VIII took power after his father, the manipulation of coin prices was already at hand. Basically, the king could just one day say, okay, this silver coin is worth this much gold, or this gold is worth this many silver. That was already at hand. Now, with that little manipulation, that wasn't crazy. They didn't go abuse this sort of power, but they had the power to do that, and they did that often, but not to a point where it would start to cripple until other things started to happen, such as war. When you have war, you need to fund the war. And if you don't have enough money to fund the war, you either can't go to war or you need to seek other options. And here we came with the clippings. Basically, you have a coin, a gold coin, and you chip a piece off that's somewhat unnoticeable. You replace that missing part with a cheaper coin, or you just leave it alone in hoping that nobody would notice that a piece is missing. The main reason for this decision for the Great Debasement was to raise the income for the royal crown. So basically, there's an article here that talks about this in depth. Now, in specific, over here, it mentions the idea of clipping. It says a common practice of the period is clipping the coins or removing some of the valuable metal from their edges. Jevons is the person doing the research here. Estimates that a normal wear and tear would be around 2 to 2.75%. So you're basically taking 2 to 2.75% from the value of the coin. And the other idea here is this is an early form of manipulation of money, where you actually have it in your hand physically, and now you can manipulate it. So like I said, the main reason for this Great Debate was to raise the income of the royal crown. By doing that, you would increase the taxation on the products and the citizens. So that would lead to the business raising their prices, which is inflation, all while not having to mint new coins from the gold needed. Basically, they don't need to get gold to get new coins. They don't have to do that. They can just simply debase the current supply, which would then go to the people because they have to pay the price. Why did he do this? He's a king. Duh. He's a politician. No different than today. And these endless and useless wars, these conflicts that politicians today, as you can see, have with other nations. But let's go way back. 15th century is too early. Let's go back to the Roman Empire, 27 BC. It's a similar story. They want more money to fund things that they don't need, such as expensive wars, live luxurious lives. I'm talking about politicians, by the way. And basically build things that they don't need, like, for example, architecture and statues, things like that. So how could they do this? They debase the currency. First, you can just lightly change the value of the coins. Like I told you, the king could just say, this is worth this now, this is worth that now. But mainly through clippings and replacing the gold with cheaper metals like silver, or if you have a silver metal, you chip some of the silver pieces off with cheaper metals like copper. Now, if you think this is too far back, let's go forward. Executive Order 6102. This was around the 1930s. I actually have it here. Right here. Okay. Well, actually, this is actually the article I was reading about the currency debasement. Now, if you look at the coins, you get a clear idea of what it's supposed to show you. So you can see how these coins look quite fine. And as we go further, you can start seeing some pieces being chipped off. And as we go further and further and further, you're basically seeing evident pieces, not just pieces anymore. They're literally like large portions of the coin completely gone. So this kind of gives you an idea of what this is: inflation in a physical form, just to see it with your eyes. So the Executive Order 6102 was around 1933, hence this is right after, well, not right after, but around the time after the Great Depression, stock market crash. And basically this rule, this law, made it illegal to own your own gold. So does that mean that soldiers, police officers, authorities went to everybody's houses to obtain the gold from them? No, they didn't need to do that, because at that time, people didn't really hold the gold in their house. They would take the gold, go to the bank, and exchange the gold for paper receipts. If you went in with $100 worth of gold, they would take the gold and give you $100 receipt saying that if I go to the bank, well, the receipt said that in their own way, but the receipt basically says if I go to the bank with this amount, I should get my gold that equals this amount. Basically, if you see the $20 bill that you look at, or $10 bill, whatever dollar bill you look at, that's a receipt. If you hold a $1 bill, you're basically saying I can go to the bank and get $1 gold back. $1 bill, $5 bill, 10, 20, 50, 100. So that's what was the system then. So basically everybody had their gold in the banks. So what did they have to do? They just had to take the gold from the bank, which is the government's anyway. So that's what happened. That's what Executive Order 6102. Majority of the people had their gold in bank vaults, in which the bank handed them paper notes, which were receipts valuing whatever amount of gold they deposited. So that wasn't it. It's not that they just took their gold. FDR then revalued the gold. So he basically took your gold and he said, I'm going to change the value of this. So he then introduced the 1934 Gold Reserve Act, which basically changed $20.67 per ounce of gold to now $35 an ounce. So basically, whatever gold I had, if I want to retrieve that gold back, I have to pay more money. Basically, it devalued the people's money. You heard that story before? Yeah. I mentioned it in the Roman Empire. I mentioned it in the English Empire. And these are just some of the major sources. This sort of thing happened all over, way back, and it's happening now. So only the smart, somewhat risk takers who were able to hide it in their house or whatever, which would not be much for a middle class family, was safe from the government taking the gold. Eventually, this panic created the Bretton Woods Agreement, in which, to strengthen the nation's currency, which at the time, the strongest nation's currency, which at the time was the U.S., because the other nations, UK, Germany, Russia, they all took a hard hit from World War I and World War II. Because remember, the U.S. didn't have to deal with too much damage in their own land. So they were basically the one standing while everybody was on the ground. And so it was obvious that their currency would be the strongest. And so the strongest currency should be pegged to the most valuable thing thought at the time, which was gold. So gold was, the dollar was pegged to gold, and every other nation's currency was pegged to the dollar. Basically, you can say the dollar acts as the middleman between the gold and the other currencies. So in between this, you might be thinking, wait a minute, why did people put gold in banks? I mean, if you can just use your common sense, you can kind of figure it out. But to go into depth, first we have an idea that China is one of the earliest users of paper money. And while they were using paper money, at the same time, Europe and Southern Asia was still in metal coins. Eventually, as explorers traveled, markets expanded, globalization took over, gold was finally hitting the wall. You know, if you're a big businessman at that time, you want to be doing large transactions, you can't be transacting with gold. It's quite impossible. It's dangerous, especially if you're on ships, because we're talking about before airplanes, before major engine transportation. So it's dangerous to be even carrying that. There's pirates and attacks from everywhere. By the 20th century, paper money took over, while gold rested in people's banks. And then what happened in 1931, that happened. But that's not it. That's not the final nail in the coffin to say, yep, we're done with gold now. The final nail happened in 1971. Since FDR and the honest U.S. government burglary of the people's money in the 1930s, with wars that followed after that the U.S. had to go through, the World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and some small-time wars in between, just like the rules of the past mentioned, the amount of gold that the government had did not match the constant spending and printing of paper bills to finance these wars. And I didn't even mention funding Social Security, healthcare, all that stuff. So eventually, around this time, countries got suspicious. How is the U.S. fighting a long, expensive war without really getting any victories and paying for it? And that's where you had France calling the bluff. So around 1971, President of France basically sent a ship of paper money to the U.S. asking to get replaced with gold. They want to trade their dollars for gold. And the U.S. basically said no and sent them back. And with this, everybody kind of knew, all right, we know what's going on now. What are you going to do? And eventually the Nixon shock occurred, basically saying, we're done with gold. We are not pegged to gold anymore. You are now only pegged to the dollar. The dollar is going to be strengthened by the economy of the US. And basically, what happened here is we've exited the gold standard and finally entered the fiat system. So we're thinking, oh, we left the gold standard. Oh, what a relief. Now we can easily transact, move money here and there without much trouble. Oh, but we entered the fiat system. Oh no. And you can clearly see the results of your current society, the current world, under this fiat system. Now, gold is tradable. You know, you can buy it when it's low, you can sell it when it's high, but it's not holdable. It's not something that your kids are going to be holding. It's nice to look at a shiny piece of rock, but eventually one comes to understand this is the reason. These are the reasons why we left the gold standard. We'll be talking about the fiat next, so that's coming up in the next video. What's up with the fiat system? Because we just talked about the gold system. How is it with the fiat system? So that will be in the next video. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.